Released in North America on April 10th, 2000 for the Game Boy Color, Pokémon the Trading Card game was here to show us that those cool cards you and your friends loved looking at actually did something. There are over 200 unique Pokémon cards to collect and build decks with, and you'll need them to take down the strongest Pokémon card players in the world and become the very best like no one ever was. This is the Pokémon Trading Card game on Game Boy Color. Welcome folks, I'm Livvvid. Quick disclaimer, I'm gonna say TCG rather than Pokémon Trading Card game over and over. It's the early 2000s and Pokemania still isn't slowing down. By April of that year, I had owned tons of the trading cards. Of course, I was actually enjoying them and not treating them like investments that I could become rich from 25 years later so that I could afford a 3-bed, 2-bath. But hey, I had fun. The only catch was neither me nor anyone I knew seemed to know how to actually play the card game. We would just show each other our coolest cards and argue about why we win.
I win.
What do you mean you win?
Because I win.
This is bullshit!
The only kid I knew who had this game was 2 years older than the rest of us kids in the apartment complex. I would have been 9 years old at the time, which would have made him 11, and talking to an 11-year-old was like talking to Obi-Wan Kenobi or something. He never really played with us, but I remember watching over his shoulder as he played this game, and I just had this wide-eyed look and walked away having no idea what I was just looking at. Let's talk about my bias. I played and beat this game probably 3 years ago for the first time, so this isn't an entirely new experience, and I really liked it a lot back then. Ever since Pokemon, I've loved trading card games for collecting reasons, but I actually started to learn how to play these games in the mid-2000s. My brother really got into Magic the Gathering and then taught me how to play so he could have someone to play with. What was originally a hobby got more serious towards 2019 for me. This is when I became a sponsored Magic the Gathering arena streamer. So I really love card games, both in paper and card games within games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Gwent. This game is based on a card game made by Wizards of the Coast and developed by Hudson Soft. Wizards and Hudson Soft's job was to make this game relatable to Pokemon fans so they would feel comfortable trying this out. Both companies did a really great job at this. The card game plays as close as possible to the main RPGs. You get a starter deck, just like a starter Pokemon. You play with a lead Pokemon in battle and 5 bench Pokemon, which relates to the 6 party Pokemon. There's elemental weaknesses and strengths, and your Pokemon can evolve, and then trainer cards act as items. These are all things you'd naturally associate from the other Pokemon games, and this was a great move marketing and design-wise. If you come into this game with some Pokemon knowledge, the concepts and rules will be easily picked up. And even if you have no prior knowledge, this is still an easy game to learn. The story for this game is pretty straightforward. You come to an island full of Pokemon TCG players in the hopes of becoming the best player ever. There are 8 master medals held by 8 club masters. Once you collect all 8 medals, you can challenge the 4 grand masters to try to become the champion. If this sounds familiar, it's because it would have been for anybody who played Pokemon Red and Blue back in the day. Those games have 8 gyms and an Elite Four to challenge to become champion as well. The player character's name is Mark, but you can name yourself whatever you like. Once you arrive on the island, you go to the Mason lab and you're greeted by Dr. Mason. He teaches you how to play the TCG and gives you your first starter deck, but more on that in a bit. It wouldn't be a Generation 1 Pokemon game without a sassy rival. Ours is Ronald McDonald. Like many rivals in this early era of Pokemon, he's a smack-talking jerk that battles you periodically. If you lose, he mocks you, and if you win, he gives you promotional cards. So how is the game played? I am going to attempt to explain it in an easily consumable way so we don't get bogged down. I'm not going to cover every rule in every scenario. I want someone who has not played this game to not be intimidated, so I'm going to break it down. You play with decks of 60 card minimums. You then place down prize cards from your own deck face down. You play out basic Pokemon which can evolve into things just like the games. But there's others that don't evolve at all. You add energies to these Pokemon which allows them to use their attacks. You and your opponent's Pokemon have strengths and weaknesses to each other. There aren't as many types in this game as in the main series games, but most of the typing matchups make sense, like fire being good against grass Pokemon, electric is good against water Pokemon. When you defeat an opponent's Pokemon by putting enough damage counters on it and it reaches its maximum HP, you choose one of your face down prize cards and add it to your hand. Once you've collected all of your prize cards, or your opponent has no more Pokemon left on their bench, you win the duel. That is a very basic explanation of this game. It doesn't cover every scenario or all win methods, but you will pick it up if you play, don't worry. As we get into gameplay, let's give credit where credit is due. Pokemon TCG was the first Pokemon game to have a run button, which would later be adopted by the main series games. I'm surprised it showed up here, but would not be added until Ruby and Sapphire a couple years later. After a short tutorial in Dr. Mason's lab, he gives you a starter deck. There is Squirtle, Charmander, and Bulbasaur and friends. These are starter Pokemon choices from Red and Blue, which makes this familiar to newer players coming over from those games. During my gameplay stream of this video, I grabbed my real cards to decide what deck we should play, and we landed on Squirtle. The starter decks are just that. They're very basic and pretty inefficient. But the issue is you don't have enough Squirtles and War Turtles to reliably draw and play your Blastoise. But really, that's the fun of the game. You leave the lab and begin battling trainers from various clubs. When you defeat them, you're given 2 packs of cards from different sets within the game. I can't be the only one who loves opening packs of cards, not knowing what you're going to get, hoping that you get that next card that will make your deck that much better, getting an idea to make a new deck from something you get. I mean, it's a more acceptable form of gambling, right? But in this game, there are 2 beautiful solutions to that thought. The first is it's all free. There isn't actually currency in this game, but obviously I mean it doesn't cost real money to buy packs of cards. In today's standards, that's nearly unheard of for the biggest TCG franchises out there. Even when you look back in retrospect, this is great. I never had many of these rare cards you can get in this game. Even in my 30s, when I open a rare card in this game that I never owned as a kid, I get butterfrees in my stomach. The second is it's merit-based, rather than having enough money to buy all the cards you want. You have to keep winning duels if you want your deck to get better. There is an added rush that your gameplay directly contributed to you getting that new pack and adding those great new cards. Your starter decks aren't that good. They're filled with mediocre cards and split between too many colors of energy. At first, progression is frustrating, but once you slowly start to craft your deck in your own image, you then work even harder for more refinements. The merit of this game truly drives the gameplay for me. Good ways of improving your deck is using your typings against clubs that are weak to your cards. If you have the Squirtle deck, go battle the Fire Club, and so on. You have numerous slots to have multiple decks. You can even find old competitive decks that were amazing back in the day and make them here, like the Haymaker deck. If you're ever not sure how to make a deck, you could do something like that, just find some old competitive ones online. But you do not need to make a super good deck like that. You can relax and have fun making your own brand of deck and you'll still progress through the game just fine. Over time, you'll get a bunch of really good cards and either modify your starter deck or start from scratch. For me, the Squirtle deck started with water, fighting, and psychic types. I slowly morphed it into a deck I called Conductivity, because I kept cracking open really good electric cards in my packs like Zapdos and Electabuzz. My favorite Pokemon card in the deck was Gyarados. You have to put Magikarp on your bench and avoid putting it into battle because it's very weak. Then you slowly put water energies on it and evolve it into Gyarados, who hits insanely hard when it's ready. Trainer cards are important, and there is nothing better than Professor Oak. You discard your entire hand and draw 7 cards. But here's the thing, it doesn't draw the same amount of cards you had. So if your hand was empty, you still draw 7. If you aren't into card games, let me be the first to tell you, playing 1 card and drawing 7 is about as ridiculous as it gets. Other than basic energies, you can only have 4 copies of 1 card in your deck, so I had 4 Oaks of course. If you've played other TCGs, you'll also be familiar with archetypes. These are decks that rely on particular playstyles. Quick decks that start off good but fall off late game, decks that stall until late game, and many others. You may find yourself finding little archetypes that you like to play with as well. As your deck comes together, you can start getting into strategies like soaking up a bunch of damage from your lead Pokemon, then switching it out for a Pokemon on your bench who is ready to fight. Some of my favorite cards were things I like to call disruption cards. Basically, any card that makes opponents' Pokemon leave the battlefield or disrupts their play. Cards like Gust of Wind are brutal. They could spend a bunch of time putting energies on their lead Pokemon, or using healing items on it so it can defend Pokemon on the bench. Then you just Gust of Wind it away for their weaker Pokemon to be destroyed. Another great one is energy removal. You pick one of your opponent's Pokemon and remove an energy from them. This can totally lock them out of game sometimes if they're short on energies. Usually you target the energy that enables their attack, like if it's a fire Pokemon and they have a fire and fighting type energy, you take away the fire energy. These advancing skills feel really satisfying as you learn and grow with the game. But the Dawn fan in the room is variance. With most card games, there is a level of randomness. You don't know what you're going to draw next, and while it can be frustrating, that's what makes these games so interesting. It's rare to have games play out the same because neither you or your opponent know what you're going to draw next or get from prize cards. Your opening hand is random, which means you may get stuck with a single basic Pokemon, which will be really exposed. Or maybe you have too many Pokemon and not enough energies. This will lead you back into deck construction, making sure you have an even balance of energies, trainer cards, and Pokemon will increase your odds of your deck running more efficiently. But beyond not knowing what you're going to draw, there is the coin flip. Coin flips are pretty unique to this game and central to it. Many attacks use it to see if it will land or add a status effect like paralysis or sleep. Variance will make you angry. At least it makes me angry from time to time. It's hard when things are out of your control. It's not your fault you kept landing on tails when you really needed a heads. But if everything ran perfectly, you wouldn't really be enjoying what those moments have to offer when something does land on heads or your opponent lands on tails. While it may be upsetting and annoying, that's what you're signing up for. I have temporary tantrums when it doesn't work out, but I wouldn't change the game or how it works overall. It's a huge rush and makes all the missed shots feel worth it in the end when it finally lands your way. As you battle across the 8 clubs, you'll have to battle their leaders. These battles are unique in that their cards are good, but also using 6 prizes, which extends the battle much longer than usual. This creates back and forth slugfests. If you jump out to an early lead, it doesn't necessarily mean you've won. All of these fights are tough and fun, but one drives me absolutely crazy. His name is Murray. He specializes in psychic types. Murray has great cards like Kangaskhan and Alakazam. You know it's good because he has spoons. But those cards pale in comparison to his ultimate card, what I believe to be the best card in the game. A card so incredible that even putting it into this video brings shivers to my spine. Mr. Mime.
Mr. Mime! Mr. Mime! Mr. Mime!
It may not look like much at first glance, but let me tell you, this thing drove me insane. It has to do with its Pokemon ability, Invisible Wall. It says, whenever an attack does 30 or more damage to Mr. Mime, prevent that damage. That may not seem so bad, but with that ability alone, this card puts itself in an entirely different realm than any other card. The only things that can hurt it are attacks that do 10 to 20 damage. The rest of the game encourages much higher damage outputs. And sure, you can have a weaker Pokemon with weaker attacks, but if you already have a strong Pokemon out, you're giving up a lot of energies to retreat just to attack Mr. Mime with a weaker Pokemon. Then, Mr. Mime can hit pretty hard too. Its Meditate attack grows stronger and stronger the more damage your Pokemon has on it. So even when you bring in a weak Pokemon to face it, Mr. Mime can still defend himself. This card alone disgraced me against Murray. Once you have finally collected the 8 medals, it's time to challenge the 4 Grandmasters to become champion. Courtney has the legendary Moltres deck. I never got to see Moltres though because we locked her out from attacking by using energy removals and having a Vaporeon which slaughtered her fire type Pokemon that were weak to it. Steve has the legendary Zapdos deck. This was one of the most intense fights in the game for me. I started off with the Squirtle and Friends deck and stayed with the water type portions of this deck. That meant I was weak to Steve's electric type Pokemon throughout the battle, but through some maneuvering we got through it. Jack has the Articuno deck. His deck is actually really good. He has a healthy amount of Lapras and Articuno cards that don't require evolutions and can soak up a lot of damage before attacking. It was a bit of a grindy match, but we eventually got there of course. Rod has a Dragonite deck, but I never got to see a Dragonite. In fact, I only ever saw a Dratini and he got really unlucky against me, unable to draw energies to attack, so he fell pretty quick. Ah, congrats, we've defeated the 4 Grandmasters to become oh no. Since these games are tied to the callbacks of the main series Pokemon games, of course, there's already a champion waiting for us. It's Ronald McDonald. He's also defeated the 4 Grandmasters, and we must face off with him in order to get the legendary Pokemon cards. The fight with Ronald is pretty grueling because he uses almost all legendary cards that have effects when they enter the battlefield. These effects don't even require him to put energies on these cards, they're just free as soon as he plays them on the bench. But once he is defeated, you are finally the champion and worthy of inheriting the legendary Pokemon cards. These are our prizes: Moltres, the legendary Flame Pokemon, Articuno, the legendary Freeze Pokemon, Zapdos, the legendary Electric Pokemon, and Dragonite, the Dragon Pokemon. They're all great cards. They have the same enter the battlefield effects that don't require any energy, which is pretty broken, but good for you now that you have them. Dragonite takes a bit of effort because you need to evolve it, but it's colorless, so it goes in any deck you want. There are even multiplayer features in this game, but in the current era they're basically dead, unless you're playing with the original hardware and have a friend who will play with you too. You could trade cards, deck lists, and even battle. There's also the Card Pop feature. Card Pop was really neat. It took advantage of the Game Boy's infrared port. You'd get together with a friend, enter the Card Pop feature, get your infrared ports on your Game Boys close to each other, and you'd both get a random promotional card. and they're actually really good. But it would record your friend's player ID from their save, so if you got any wise ideas about getting a bunch of cards, forget about it, you scoundrel. It actually recorded 15 other player IDs, so you'd have to trade with 15 unique trainer IDs before you could trade with that first friend again. There are 2 phantom cards in the card pop feature. Venusaur isn't available at all legitimately due to a programming error. Remember, we're in Gen 1, so this is par for the course. But the Venusaur was available as a real card if you got the English Player's Guide. Then there is Mew, which is obtainable, but probably the hardest card to get from the card prop feature. One of the coolest things about a card game in a video game is cards like these GB only cards. GB stands for Game Boy. These are cards that can do really interesting things in the game, but would be a nightmare to do without a computer doing everything instantly. Ditto is a great example. You remove all damage counters from it and search your deck for a random basic Pokemon card to transform into. This would be insane in person. You'd need to rifle through your deck and get all of your basic Pokemon, and your opponent would get to look as well to make sure you got them all. Then you'd have to find a system to randomly select one of them. Then shuffle your deck back up. Yeah, that's not realistic in person, but works great here. The music to this game is great and beloved by many. The composer was Ichiro Shimakura. Here's a list of his credits. He has worked on some bangers. He did this, Mario Party 3 and 4, and Bomberman 64. It's a great soundtrack and definitely distinct for what Junichi Masuda does. It has a late 80s retro 8-bit style to it. It's very peppy and quick. These were my favorite tracks. The title screen, the Club Master Duel, but the absolute best song in the entire game is the Final Four theme. I couldn't get enough of this song. I would just stop playing to soak it in every minute or so. I'm continually surprised at the quality of Pokemon spin-off games' original soundtracks. They didn't disappoint. This game was a blast. If you're unfamiliar with it or intimidated by learning the actual card game as a Pokemon fan, I really stress you just play it. It's addictive to collect cards and build better and better decks. Looking back on cards you did or even didn't own, but recognize will bring a smile to your face. The battling itself is really addictive and can be heart-pounding at times watching that coin flip. You can even play this game on Nintendo Switch's expansion pass. There is also a sequel game that was only released in Japan, but people have gone back and translated it into English. Someone named Chrono from our community has made it accessible to me, so if you'd ever like me to play it, just let me know. That's all I've got for Pokemon TCG on the Game Boy Color. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help. You guys have been awesome. Consider supporting me on these socials as it will help me make more content. Thank you to my YouTube channel members, patrons, and Twitch subscribers. And thank you for making it this far into the video. I'll see you in the next one.